on, Geeklings? Today is more of a unique Legends of Mythology, less focus on one particular god, and more focus on mythology as a whole. So today I'm going to start part 1 of a deeper dive into the Egyptian mythology just as a whole and the overarching lore. Today's episode, we are looking at the creation, their version of the creation of the universe, titled Creation Out of Chaos. Now, I am reading this out of a book, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Ancient Egypt's creator gods dreamed, spoke, and blew a life force into the universe, the earth and all that was on it, shaping everything, both natural and man-made. Thereafter, gods and the humans they molded embarked on a complex relationship played out in a myriad of myths. The myths of the great creator gods are mercurial, so that not even the formation of the universe, and within it the earth, can be attributed to a single method or god. These fundamental myths changed not only with time, but also with the persuasion of rulers. The imaginations of priests and the ongoing ascendancy of one capital city or nome, each with their patron deities over another. There's also no knowing which version of events an individual believed in, nor whether a personal preference was set in stone for a lifetime. Many creation myths may not have stood the test of time, either as oral traditions or as written text, and we will never know their narrative. Some of the given myths may have been cobbled together from different versions of core themes. Despite the lack of clarity, there is a rich body of creation myths with strongly portrayed gods at their heart. Most of them were narrated and portrayed in partial form in pyramid texts on tomb walls during the Old Kingdom, 2686 through 2160 BC, and subsequently described in further fragments from the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1069 BC. It is the fragmentary nature of the evidence that suggests the patching together of some ancient Egypt's mythical beginnings. Creating Earth from Chaos, the Hermopolitan story. 4 greater gods, with heads in the form of frogs, and 4 great goddesses in the shape of snakes, formed the Ogdod, the 8 creator deities of Gimano or Gamon. Gimano is a city-state on the west bank of the Nile in Middle Egypt. It was later named Hermopolis by the Greeks, which meant City of Hermes, a deity who is associated with Thoth as well as the Ogdod. Thoth, an outsider in terms of the Ogdod, was nevertheless called the Lord of Hermopolis. As a very ancient deity, probably dating back to at least 6000 BC, Thoth is depicted as a man with the head of an ibis. In one creation myth, a great ibis laid the egg from which the radiant sun god Ra emerged to create the world and everything it needed. If Thoth is linked directly with this myth, it explains why, when priests promoted his qualities and elevated his position in the pantheon, he is attached to other creator gods of the Ogdod as their souls. The octode itself worked in female and male pairs to enable the creation of the universe, the earth, and all that sustains it. Both the frog and the snake were associated with the Nile waters and the miracle of inundation. The frog metamorphosing like magic from a tadpole, and the snake emerging from when the flood waters receded, revealing the miracle of fertile soil. In cosmic terms, it might be interpreted that the frog, having transformed from a small wriggling form that swam in dark, deep, chaotic waters, embodied in the god Nun, could now leap to earth, perceived at the dawn of creation as a mound of soil. This magical heap of silt, the first patch of dry land, in the middle of an unappealing soup, was formed in a number of ways by a variety of gods, but it is often attributed to the collective willpower and imagination of the octode. In Hermopolis, this land was called the Island of Flames. 8 gods, but many myths. Many creation myths or versions of a main theme surround the gods and goddesses of the octode. A common narrative sees the octode deities at hands-off creation of the world, pushing out a force, through which the Island of Flames at Hermopolis rose from the dark, powerful soup of Nun. Upon this island, a force emerged as a great cosmic egg, also fabricated by the octode. Unseen at first because there was no light, and therefore also unnamed, it flew out of the egg and became the bird of light, a characteristic of the sun god Ra. It was he who created everything else, and crucially, he died every day and rose again the next morning. His resurrection, and that of human beings, especially rulers, priests, and high officials, became a national preoccupation until the end of the ancient kingdom. The great creator god Amun was also seen as the one who fertilized the egg, using only his breath. Or, unusually, he mouthed a celestial goose that laid the egg, from which Ra hatched, and went forth to fashion the world. This goose, known as Gengenwer, or the Great Honker, was revered as a respecter and protector of nature and of life. As such, Gengenwer was blessed with a loyal following of ordinary Egyptians, although his gentle powers swiftly waned. One tradition is that his shell is buried in Hermopolis. He is depicted with eggs on a stele at Set Mat, the place of truth, now called Deir al-Medina, on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. Over time, priests elevated Amun and his consort Amunet to the position of prime forces that were independent of the Agdad. Amun's creation myths grew in popularity. So too did those of Thoth, who was often seen by his side as an efficient and diligent enabler, but was never forgotten as a creator god. In the myth, Thoth, lord of Hermopolis, later also of the city of Thebes in Upper Egypt, was a stalwart at the right hand of the greatest god since the beginning of time, and later the brains and chief administrator supporting ancient Egypt's kings. Priests elaborated on the this narrative, exalting him as a creative, efficient servant and the lord of scribes, possibly trying to identify with his indispensability in the sight of the rulers. Thoth was certainly a great god and had awesome power in his own right, but is also closely associated with others from different parts of the kingdom. At times, he was known as the tongue of Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, who spoke the world into being. Later, an image of Thoth appears on a doorway to a temple for Amun at Hermopolis during the reign of Seti II, 1200 to 1194 BC, a whopping 6 years. Thoth appears beside Amun as a loyal companion and servant, wearing his moon god lunar discs and crescent to shine a light over an even greater god formed from a lotus flower. There is one symbol of Egypt that encapsulates the unfolding of the breathtaking civilization that was ancient Egypt, which is depicted in many forms, from the earliest times to the end of the kingdom. Hermopolitan myths tell us that the rising sun in the form of Ra or Khepri, the scarab beetle, bursts through an opening petals of the lotus at dawn. In one myth, Ra went on to create Earth. In another, Khepri emerged as a sun-child, hushing the newly formed world with a finger pressed to his lips. A late tradition from the Ptolemaic period, 330 to 30 BC, sees the male gods of the Ogdoad setting seed in the perilous sea of the Noon. The seed then floated to an egg-shaped ovary, a banen in the lake of fire, where it was fertilized. A lotus flower grew through the egg, and as the petal opened, a boy child emerged. The blue lotus, which rises to the surface of the water in the morning and sinks below it at night, is yet another symbol of renewal and resurrection. Ptah, the lotus, the lone creator from Memphis. Ptah is the sole totemic god of Memphis, a city on the Nile Delta near modern-day Cairo, and the only capital of Egypt by the beginning of the Second Dynasty, 2890 BC. In spite of Ptah's ancient pedigree as god of grass people, stretching back long before the unification of Egypt, evidence of his myth as a creator is late from about 700 BC. Ptah's new role was narrated in the Memphis creation myth on a slab of granite known as the Shibaka stone, the more archaic language telling the story of the new kingdom. This is not to say that the myth itself is not older. Ptah, like so many other great gods, created himself. In papyrus text number 3048, now in the Museum of Berlin, it is said of Ptah that he was a body that created its own body when heaven did not even exist, and when the earth also did not exist. Having fashioned himself, Ptah molded the universe, the world, and all of its features through the thoughts that spilled from his heart and into his mouth, sometimes coughing out gods. With his hands he crafted living beings. Towns stones and shrines from wood, metal, and stone, depicted as a man wrapped in cloth and a close-fitting cap, rather like a mummy. Thus contrasting bare hands highlighted his innate ability to create, and explains his title as God of all craftspeople. Okay, so just some weird technical difficulties. We're gonna pause the recording and restart it, and I am much brighter, and we don't know why, but we're gonna keep going. Creating good and evil, the gods of Enid. The cluster of gods, named by the Greeks as the Enid, or the Nine, were the totems of Heliopolis. The Enid includes deities of judgment in the epic tale of Osiris and Set, the two gods who personified good and evil, peace and war. This is a creation story of a different kind, in that it fabricates powerful and often contradictory emotional forces that in turn lead to actions and consequences. The Osiris and Set myth creates an awareness of consciousness that drives the choice between the opposite pathways, and the heroism so found in those who support is seen to be right. The Enid is perhaps a group of gods that creates the psychology of emotional extremes and a way out of the chaos that these engender. It molds the ideal of a legal system that can maintain harmony in society. Although this seems like a tale of rigid stereotyping of white and black, or good and bad, the character of Set becomes more nuanced over time, and very occasionally he assumes the role of a protector. There's no escaping the fact that Set murdered his brother Osiris, and that a way was needed to resurrect him to perpetuate the idea of an eternal god. While the Osiris myth did not create the concept of eternal life, this was more prominence of the sun god, who rose again every day at dawn. The concept of life, death, and resurrection in a more human form of God, such as Osiris, was more tangible to humans and indispensable to kings in their need to seem immortal. Creating himself, the myths of Atum. Atum created himself through his own force, and one myth tells that having done so, he searched for a place to stand in the dark waters of noon. Atum saw something solid rising above the slimy slope, and stepping in it, realized it was Myth of Osiris, the cow goddess. Another myth refers to an island hill that emerged as the Nile waters receded after the annual inundation, and this hill was the land on which Heliopolis stood. Perched on this island, Atum realized that the god Elissa, grandmother of all gods, together they created Shu and the goddess Tefnut. On pyramid texts, the creator god, presumed to be Atum, surfaced from the chaotic darkness and slime of noon as a mythical Bennu bird, a phoenix-like heron, who flew to Heliopolis, where at dawn he landed on the Benben obelisk that represented the rays of the sun. After fashioning a net of herbs, spices, and aromatic woods, he burst into flames, but miraculously re-emerged, whole and unscathed. the capstone on obelisks, and the pyramidion is also called a benben, and is a symbol of rejuvenation and reincarnation, like the sun, and as such, he is often seen as the soul of the risen god, Ra. From the Enid emerges possibly the greatest reincarnation story in ancient Egypt's mythology, the Myth of Osiris. Osiris, as the god of vegetation, should have led an important but quiet life, perpetuating wheat crops and averting cattle pasture for the people of ancient Egypt. Instead, his wisdom and industry led him to become the divine king of Egypt, traveling the world and educating its people about the gods, the roles, and the rituals required to respect and honor them. Jesus. As well as this, Osiris spread civilization across the land, and his benign, generous nature endeared him to all, except his envious brother, Set, who was jealous of the love and respect given to Osiris, and vengeful towards Osiris's wife, Isis, who was given power to rule Egypt when her husband was away. Set determined to rid the universe of his popular brother, constructed a party trick with the help of 72 assistants. Kidding me. Bringing a beautiful, elaborately decorated chest to a banquet, they invited all the guests to lay in it to see whom it would best fit. Unknown to Osiris, Set had made the chest according to his brother's exact measurements. When his turn came, he fit into it perfectly, at which point Set and his friends snapped the lid shut. The chest, now a coffin, was thrown into the Nile, where Osiris drowned. But the coffin floated out to sea, and Set, also known as Isis, devastated but determined, found it stuck in a tree outside the Lebanese port of Pyptios. Having returned to Egypt, Set took care of the body, unaware that Set knew of its return. Enraged, he snatched it and tore it into 13 pieces, which he shared among 13 settlements. But Set never gave up and found all but one eye. With the help of her sister Nephthys, she joined the body together, mummified it, and through the miracle of great gods, he was restored. Even while Osiris was dead, Set performed the remarkable feat of becoming pregnant with their son, the great god Horus. It would have been a perfect love story, except that Nephthys, sister of Set and wife of Set, met up with Osiris, and in the midst of drunken ecstasy, they intertwined their bodies together. In symbolism, Osiris, the floodwaters, washed over Nephthys, the red desert, from which sprang a carpet of flowers. Osiris left his lover with a garland of sweet yellow clover, and some say that their union created the jackal-headed Anubis, a god of mummification and protector of the dead. This fleeting passion did not change the nature of Set, who, ever-loving and forgiving, worked with Nephthys in the process of resurrection. In this myth and in other versions, together with the daily renewal of Ra, the sun god, that forms the basis for the belief in resurrection, around which ancient Egypt's elaborate rituals, priesthood, temples, and even great pyramids were built. Osiris remains king in the underworld while his son, Horus, continued the visceral feud with Set. Oops, sorry. Creator of the sun god, Neith. As an ancient goddess possibly associated with North African Berber culture, Neith was seen as both wise and warlike, and as such was symbolized by 2 arrows crossed on a shield. But as a weaver, she wove the world into being and kept reweaving it every day on her great loom. Neith continued as a greater goddess throughout the ages, later associated with the Ogdoad gods. In myth, this association is played out by Neith when she fertilizes an egg, producing the sun god Ra, who then adopts the persona of Atum. In his turn, Atum goes on to create more gods from his saliva and humankind from his tears. In her role as the creator of Ra, Neith later became associated with the cow, a symbol of fertility. In one myth, she emerges from noon and metamorphoses from a Nile perch fish, forming a piece of land and standing on it as a newly realized cow. She voices 30 lesser gods who help her mold the rest of the world once they have transformed themselves into the Ogdoad. Neith is immortalized on the walls of the Temple of Kmun at Isna, around 34 miles south of Luxor. The promotion of provisional creator gods. Over time, the unification of Egypt led to a fluid exchange of leading creator gods that broke the strictures of the Ogdoad, Enid, and Memphis pantheons, led by creative and at the times perhaps crafty, politicized priests and divine kings and pharaohs, gods that were totemic to a particular city or region, ranged beyond it, and rose in power. A moon of Hermopolis and a tomb of Heliopolis, with Ra, god of the sun, or Horus, or Rakthi, god of the sky, became with others major gods in the wider pantheon, building outside of their creator bases. For some, the boy who emerged from the lotus flower was the god Nefertum, who became the great national god Atum. For others, he was a young Horus, the product of Harakthati, a glorious melding of 2 deities that describe the gods of a rising sun in the infinite sky, who were seen as protectors of the entire kingdom. With the age of creation long gone, the gods of the Ogdoad, Enid, and the gods of Memphis did not disappear without a trace. In some traditions, the gods of the Ogdoad lay buried near Thebes, at the cult centers of Edfu, Isna, and Mednet-Habu. In others, they are dissolved into the waters of the Nile, guarding and nurturing the waters forevermore. The gods that rose above all others, together with lesser deities and in the expansive pantheon, maintained order in the universe, the rotation of life and death, including humankind. Threat of noon. The creation of a stable earth from a chaotic slime of the god Noon was never a permanent event. Ancient Egyptians saw as a continual threat to return to Noon, represented by the malevolent snake god Apep, who tried every night to murder the sun god Ra, filling the darkness with his hideous roar. In the Book of the Dead, the great god Atum warned Osiris that the murky waters of Noon would one day rise again, and darkness would envelop the earth. On a daily basis, the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt kept the gloom of oblivion at bay for thousands of years. To ensure their blessings and interventions, priests and people alike praised and entreated them through rituals, libations, offerings, and the building of great statues and temples. In this way, the sun would always rise in the morning, and the flood waters would flow every year, and death would never overcome life. In more prosaic terms, the roles and characteristics of the gods, so amply played out in myth, came down to earth so that they could be applied to everyday life. Gods and goddesses, in all their respects, were at work and at play with the people. However, it took more than creator gods and goddesses to keep the wheels of ancient Egypt turning. I hope you enjoyed this episode of a deeper dive into the customs and myths of ancient Egypt. Let me know if you liked it, and we will see what else kept ancient Egypt turning. Thanks for tuning in, guys.